You know what is truly pathetic about my family? They genuinely believe I am a broke hotline operator drowning in debt. When my sister offered me a job cleaning her basement, I did not get mad. I just smiled. They had absolutely no idea they were trying to enslave the founder of a $2.7 billion empire. In exactly 48 hours, their arrogance would cost them everything, and I would be the one holding the match. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for tuning in to Maya Revenge Stories today. Sadly, YouTube has completely disabled our monetization feature, leaving us without the necessary budget to keep the channel running as usual. If you find yourself captivated by today's story, please consider supporting our work by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon community, where you will unlock access to even more gripping, extended, and incredibly detailed exclusive true stories featuring multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot publish here on YouTube. You can become a patron right now by scanning the QR code displayed on your screen, or by clicking the direct link in the video description and pinned comment. Now, let us begin today's journey with a 32-year-old woman named Allison Washington. Blood is supposed to be thicker than water, but in my family, blood is just another currency they use to buy their own vanity. For as long as I can remember, my parents and my younger sister looked at me not as a person, but as a cautionary tale. To them, I am the ultimate disappointment. They are absolutely certain that I am drowning in credit card debt, living paycheck to paycheck as a miserable customer service hotline operator for a decaying electronic waste recycling plant. They love this narrative. It makes them feel superior. I never bothered to correct them. The truth is something they could not possibly comprehend, let alone handle. Behind the carefully crafted facade of my supposed failure, I am the sole founder and secret chief executive officer of Aura Grid Systems. Over the past decade, I built a $2.7 billion green energy technology and data infrastructure empire that dominates the entire West Coast. I have senators on my speed dial and global investors begging for a 5-minute meeting. But to my mother, Eleanor, I am just a stain on the family portrait. The invitation came via a predictably cold phone call early on a Tuesday morning. Eleanor did not call to ask how I was doing. She called to issue a summons. "Allison, you are required at Vanessa's house this Friday evening," my mother instructed, her voice dripping with that familiar, icy disdain. "It is a celebration dinner. Vanessa and Marcus are about to secure a massive investment for their Greenhaven Eco Resort project. Wear something presentable for once in your life. Do not embarrass us." Vanessa is my younger sister, the golden child who can do no wrong. A year ago, she married Marcus, an overly ambitious and painfully arrogant city planning commissioner. Together, they formed the perfect power couple, at least in their own minds. They were throwing this lavish party to boast about Greenhaven, a supposed ecological sanctuary that was poised to make them millions. Knowing exactly who I was dealing with, I made a deliberate choice for the evening. I could have arrived in my chauffeur-driven luxury sedan wearing a custom-tailored designer gown. Instead, I drove my beat-up, scratched, 12-year-old compact car. I went to a local thrift store and purchased the cheapest, most poorly fitted gray polyester suit I could find for $18. I wanted to see it. I wanted to measure exactly how deep their greed, their arrogance, and their contempt for me truly ran. I needed to know if there was even a shred of humanity left in them before I finalized the trap I was already setting. The moment I pulled up to Vanessa and Marcus's sprawling, multi-million-dollar suburban mansion, the tone was set. The valet driver looked at my rusted car with pure disgust before reluctantly taking the keys. I walked up the marble steps, taking a deep breath before pushing open the heavy oak doors. The main hall was glittering with crystal chandeliers, expensive champagne, and local politicians. The instant I stepped into the light, the room seemed to undergo a subtle shift. I immediately caught the fake, pitying looks darting my way. Eleanor spotted me first. She closed her eyes for a brief second, releasing a heavy sigh of theatrical disappointment, before marching over to shove a glass of cheap wine into my hand. "I told you to wear something presentable, Allison," she hissed under her breath, grabbing my arm tightly. "Stay in the back. Let your sister have her moment. Vanessa glided over in a stunning silk evening gown, a massive diamond catching the light on her finger. She threw her arms around me in a suffocating, highly choreographed hug for the benefit of her wealthy guests watching us. "Oh, Allison, I'm so glad you could afford the gas to make it here," Vanessa announced loudly, ensuring at least half a dozen potential investors heard her. Marcus stood right behind her, swirling his expensive scotch with a smug, predatory grin. In that exact moment, looking at their perfectly polished faces, the reality of the situation washed over me. I was not invited to this mansion to share in their joy. I was not a guest. I was a prop. I was summoned here to play the role of the pathetic, impoverished scapegoat so that the brilliant, successful Vanessa could shine even brighter by comparison. They wanted the entire room to see the stark contrast between the wealthy golden child and the miserable failure of a sister. I took a sip of the bitter wine, keeping my face perfectly blank. I smiled softly at Vanessa, absorbing every ounce of their toxic mockery. They thought they were the predators playing with a helpless mouse. They had no idea they had just invited a leviathan into their glass house, and the glass was already starting to crack. The clinking of crystal glasses faded as the last of the wealthy investors and local politicians drove away from the mansion. The extravagant celebration dinner was over, but the real main event of the night was just beginning. The heavy oak doors finally clicked shut, sealing out the damp evening air. My father, Richard, loosened his silk tie and pointed a rigid finger toward the center of the sunken living room. "Allison, take a seat on the sofa. We are not done here," he commanded, his voice devoid of any paternal warmth. I walked over and sat on the edge of the white leather couch, keeping my hands neatly folded in my lap. Eleanor, Vanessa, and Marcus arranged themselves in the armchairs opposite me, forming a unified front of judgment. The atmosphere in the room immediately thickened, becoming suffocatingly oppressive. Richard reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, professionally bound folder. He tossed it onto the glass coffee table with a loud, dismissive smack. I glanced down. Printed across the cover in bold, black ink were the words, "Life Rectification Plan." "We have decided it is time for a loving intervention," my father announced, though there was absolutely nothing loving about the glare he was giving me. "You are 32 years old, Allison. You have no career, no assets, and you are drowning in debt. It is a humiliation to this family name." Before I could even process the audacity of the folder, Marcus stepped forward. He clasped his hands behind his back, adopting the exact patronizing posture he used during his city council campaigns. "Let us be completely honest, Allison," Marcus lectured, looking down his nose at me. "Society is firmly divided into two categories of people. There are the visionaries who build the future, and there are the burdens who weigh it down. Right now, you are a burden. You are a drain on the economy and a constant source of anxiety for your parents. But because Vanessa has such a generous heart, we have decided to integrate you into a productive environment." Vanessa leaned forward, a sickly sweet smile stretching across her perfectly contoured face. She slid a second document out from beneath the folder and pushed it across the glass table toward me. It was an employment contract. "We are throwing you a lifeline, sister," Vanessa said, tapping her manicured nail against the signature line. "Marcus and I have agreed to let you move into the unfinished basement of this house. You will act as my personal assistant, handle the daily housekeeping for our property, and take over the janitorial duties at the new Greenhaven site office. We will pay you a flat rate of $12 an hour. Obviously, there are zero health benefits and no paid time off, but considering your absolute lack of qualifications, it is a miracle we are offering you this much." I stared at the document. They were not offering me a job. They were handing me a slavery contract, wrapped in the guise of family charity. "And there is one more thing," Richard interjected, his tone suddenly shifting from authoritative to calculating. He pulled out a third piece of paper, a standard legal form. "Your Aunt Beatrice left you that useless, barren patch of dirt out by the county line before she died. It is completely worthless, and the property taxes are just dragging you deeper into poverty. We are going to help you liquidate it. This is an unconditional power of attorney. You sign it, and Marcus will transfer the deed to a holding company to pay off your supposed credit card debts. It is for your own good." The entire room went completely silent. My heart did a slow, steady, and very cold beat. Suddenly, the entire theatrical performance made perfect sense. They did not care about my living situation. They did not care about reforming my life. This intervention was an elaborate, disgusting trap designed to steal my inheritance. That barren patch of dirt my aunt left me was not worthless, I knew. Thanks to the advanced geological mapping data processed by my own servers at Oragrid, that my small parcel of land sat directly on top of the only stable groundwater aquifer in the entire valley. Without that specific piece of land, the massive Greenhaven eco-resort would never secure the necessary environmental permits to break ground. Without water rights, their multi-million-dollar project was completely dead in the water. They needed my land, and they thought I was stupid enough to just hand it over for free while scrubbing their toilets. "If you refuse to sign these," Eleanor warned, her voice razor-sharp, "we will completely cut you off. No more family holidays. No more contact. We will not watch you destroy yourself anymore." They were threatening to disown me over a piece of land they intended to steal. The sheer toxicity of their manipulation hung in the air, thick and foul. A normal person would have cried. A normal person would have screamed, torn up the papers, and stormed out of the house. But I am not a normal person, and I do not react to threats. I destroy them. I kept my expression terrifyingly calm, a blank mask that betrayed absolutely nothing. I reached out and carefully stacked the contracts together, pulling them onto my lap. "This is a lot to take in," I said, my voice soft and measured. "I appreciate the intervention. However, I never sign legal documents without reading them first. Give me exactly 48 hours to review the terms." Vanessa rolled her eyes, groaning in frustration, but Marcus placed a restraining hand on her shoulder, giving her a knowing smirk. He thought he had already won. He thought a desperate, broke hotline operator was just trying to salvage a tiny shred of dignity before inevitably surrendering. "Fine," Marcus agreed, checking his expensive gold watch. "You have exactly 48 hours. Allison, after that, the offer expires, and you are on your own." I stood up, clutching the papers to my chest like a lifeline, playing the pathetic role they demanded of me to the very last second. I walked out of their pristine mansion and climbed back into my beat-up car. As I turned the key in the ignition, my hands were not shaking from sadness or fear. I smiled, a genuine, cold smile in the dark. They wanted my land, and they wanted my obedience. Instead, they had just given me 48 hours to weave an inescapable web that would tear their entire world apart. I had just turned the key in the ignition of my rusted car when the freezing night air bit through my thin blouse. I suddenly realized my cheap thrift store coat was still hanging in the guest closet near the back hallway of the mansion. Leaving it behind would give them another excuse to mock my supposed poverty the next time they saw me. I turned the engine off and slipped quietly back through the heavy oak doors, which the valet had carelessly left unlocked during the cleanup process. The grand main hall was completely empty, the hired caterers having retreated to the kitchen to pack up their equipment. As I tiptoed down the dimly lit corridor, a sliver of yellow light cut sharply across the hardwood floor from the cracked door of Marcus's private study. I reached for the brass handle, intending to simply grab my coat from the adjacent room and leave. But a panicked, trembling voice froze my hand in midair. It was Vanessa. "Are you completely insane? Marcus, we cannot possibly submit these reports to Oragrid Systems," Vanessa hissed, her heavy footsteps pacing frantically back and forth across the carpet. "The environmental assessments are completely fabricated. Every single metric regarding the soil stability and toxic runoff is a lie." "Keep your voice down," Marcus snapped back, his smooth, arrogant politician persona completely shattered by desperation. "We need Oragrid. If we do not secure a partnership with a $2.7 billion tech giant, the Federal Investment Board will pull our funding by Monday morning. Their corporate brand name is the only thing that gives our project legitimacy. And what happens when their risk management team actually reads the raw data? Vanessa cried out, her voice cracking with pure terror. If they run their own independent audit and discover the groundwater toxicity levels, we are not just going to go bankrupt. Defrauding a public investment fund is a federal crime. We will both go to federal prison for 20 years. They will not look that closely, Marcus growled, sounding more delusional than confident. Oragrid is too massive to micromanage a suburban eco-resort. We just need their stamp of approval on the contract. Once they sign, the federal money unlocks, and we can quietly fix the soil issues later. I stood perfectly still in the shadows of the hallway. The sheer magnitude of their stupidity was breathtaking. They were planning to use my own company as a sacrificial shield for their criminal fraud. I did not even bother retrieving my coat. I turned around and slipped back out into the night like a ghost. 45 minutes later, I walked into the highly secure subterranean server room beneath my actual residence, a brutalist concrete fortress overlooking the ocean. I bypassed the biometric retinal scanners and sat down at the main terminal. The pathetic, submissive facade was gone. I was now in my domain. I activated the Oragrid Internal Data Intelligence Framework, unleashing a proprietary algorithm designed to track corporate espionage and trace offshore financial networks. I typed Marcus's full name into the command prompt and hit enter. The massive wall of monitors illuminated the dark room with cascading streams of raw data. I ordered the system to pull every public and private financial record tied to the Greenhaven project. Within 10 minutes, the machine had mapped out a dizzying, corrupt web of shell companies, fake contractors, and bribed city inspectors. Marcus was bleeding money, and Greenhaven was nothing but a hollow shell designed to siphon federal grants. But it was the secondary background sweep that made my blood run ice cold. The system flagged a registered patent under Vanessa's name, the very foundation of her newfound reputation as a green technology genius. I opened the encrypted file. It was a highly advanced groundwater analysis algorithm, supposedly developed by Vanessa 6 months ago. My eyes scanned the lines of code. Every elegant loop, every meticulously structured query, it was unmistakable. I had spent countless sleepless nights in my cramped college dorm room perfecting that logic. It was my senior thesis project, a revolutionary method for predicting subterranean water flow patterns. I had stored the original source code on an old external hard drive, which I had accidentally left in the attic of my parents' house when I moved out. I dug deeper into the federal database, pulling the notary records for the patent application. There, at the bottom of the glowing screen, were the digitized signatures of Richard and Eleanor Washington. My parents had actively served as legal witnesses. They had helped Marcus forge the developmental timestamps, bypass the intellectual property checks, and steal my life's work, just to staple it onto Vanessa's resume. They did not just view me as a failure. They viewed me as a resource to be harvested. My own mother and father had orchestrated a premeditated theft, scrubbing my name from my own intellectual property so Vanessa could parade around high society as a brilliant innovator. Any lingering trace of familial obligation I might have harbored evaporated in that cold, sterile server room. I was no longer dealing with annoying, arrogant relatives. I was dealing with thieves who were actively trying to drag my empire into a federal indictment. The sharp ringing of my encrypted phone broke the silence. It was David, the Chief Operating Officer of Oragrid Systems. "Good evening, Allison," David said, his voice crisp and professional. "I apologize for the late hour, but we just received a highly aggressive Priority 1 meeting request. A local city planning commissioner named Marcus, along with his wife Vanessa, are demanding an emergency sit-down with the executive board tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. They want to finalize a partnership for a project called Greenhaven. They are claiming they have secured massive federal backing and need our signature immediately. Should I have the legal department toss their proposal in the shredder?" I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, staring at the stolen patent on the main monitor. A slow, dangerous smile crept across my face. The prey was not just walking into the trap. They were practically sprinting toward the slaughterhouse. "No, David," I replied, my voice chillingly calm. "I want you to accept the appointment. Roll out the red carpet for them. Bring them straight up to the executive glass boardroom on the 50th floor." "Understood," David said, slightly confused but never questioning my judgment. "Shall I prepare the standard introductory briefing for you to lead?" "Do not put my name on the schedule," I instructed softly. "I want my identity completely concealed from them until the very last minute of the meeting. Let them talk. Let them dig their own graves. Tomorrow morning, I am going to teach them exactly what happens when you try to steal from the architect." At exactly 6:30 the following morning, my burner phone buzzed. It was Eleanor. She demanded I meet them at a downtown coffee shop near the financial district. When I arrived in my $18 suit, they were already there, dressed in custom Italian fabrics and reeking of expensive cologne. Eleanor shoved 2 massive cardboard trays carrying 6 piping hot lattes into my hands. Then, Marcus casually dropped his heavy, leather briefcase onto my shoulder, nearly knocking me off balance. "You are coming with us today, Allison," Eleanor dictated, wiping a speck of imaginary dust from Marcus's lapel. "You are going to carry the bags, hold the coffee, and keep your mouth completely shut. It is high time you witnessed how truly successful people operate in the real corporate world. Consider this an educational experience, a glimpse into a life you will never achieve on your own." I adjusted the heavy briefcase on my shoulder, letting the hot paper cups burn my fingers slightly. "Yes, Mother," I whispered, keeping my eyes glued to the pavement, acting the part of the broken, defeated daughter to perfection. We walked 2 blocks to the imposing steel and glass monolith that served as the global headquarters for Aura Grid Systems. It towered over the city, a shimmering, razor-sharp monument to the empire I had built from absolute scratch over 10 grueling years. As we approached the massive revolving doors, Marcus puffed out his chest, completely oblivious to the fact that he was strutting right into my house. Inside the grand lobby, the vaulted ceilings stretched 50 feet high. The floors were polished black marble, and heavily armed security guards stood at every checkpoint. The sheer scale of the wealth on display was staggering. Vanessa suddenly grabbed my elbow, her manicured nails digging fiercely into my cheap polyester sleeve. She dragged me toward a massive structural pillar, shoving me into its shadow. "Stand right here in the dark corner," Vanessa hissed, looking around frantically as if my mere presence would infect the billionaires walking past us. "Do not speak to anyone. Do not make eye contact with the receptionists. If someone asks who you are, you say you are a temporary worker we hired out of pity. I will not let your pathetic, poverty-stricken aura ruin the biggest day of my entire life." I nodded submissively, staring blankly at the marble floor. I watched in silence as she marched up to the front desk, aggressively throwing her name around. The head receptionist, who had been thoroughly briefed by David the night before, gave Vanessa a flawlessly polite smile and handed her 3 temporary security badges. We were immediately escorted past the standard security lines and directed to the private, high-speed executive elevator reserved exclusively for the board of directors. As the steel doors closed and we shot upward to the 50th floor, the tension in the tiny, mirrored space was palpable. Marcus was rapidly straightening his silk tie, his breathing shallow and fast, while Vanessa nervously checked her lipstick reflection, practicing her fake, charming smile. I just stood quietly in the back, holding their lukewarm coffee, playing the role of the invisible pack mule flawlessly. They did not even notice me watching them in the mirror. The elevator chimed, opening into the cavernous executive suite. We were ushered by an assistant into a massive, soundproof glass boardroom suspended over the sprawling city skyline. Sitting around the polished mahogany table were 4 of my top executives, led by David, the chief operating officer. Next to them sat 2 stern-looking, silver-haired representatives from the Federal Banking Commission. The massive leather chair at the head of the table, my chair, remained conspicuously empty. "Please, have a seat," David offered, his face a masterclass in absolute professionalism. He did not even cast a single glance in my direction. I quietly placed the coffees on the side counter and retreated to a small, uncomfortable wooden chair pressed against the far wall, clasping my hands meekly in my lap. Marcus and Vanessa did not waste a single second. For the next 45 minutes, they paced around the room, delivering a nauseatingly arrogant and aggressively rehearsed presentation. They displayed glossy, high-definition slides of the Green Haven project, making grandiose promises about sustainability, ecological harmony, and community revitalization. But the most sickening part of the entire spectacle was their constant, manipulative reliance on the concept of family values. "Our project is built on a foundation of unbreakable family ethics," Marcus proclaimed loudly, resting a loving theatrical hand on Vanessa's shoulder. "My wife, who single-handedly developed the revolutionary water purification technology you see in these blueprints, is a testament to our moral compass. We believe in transparency, honesty, and protecting the community. That is exactly why we are the perfect partners for a prestigious, industry-leading company like Oragrid." From my dark corner, I watched David casually flip through the heavy printed proposal. He paused on the environmental metrics page, looking up slowly over the rim of his glasses. "This is a very ambitious undertaking, Marcus," David said, his tone dangerously smooth and impossibly polite. "However, before we can even consider attaching the pristine Oragrid brand to a federal grant of this massive magnitude, I have to ask a standard, yet absolutely critical question. Are there any hidden legal risks associated with this development? Are there any pending land disputes, falsified environmental metrics, toxic soil reports, or intellectual property concerns we should be aware of?" The massive room went dead silent for a fraction of a second. I saw a microscopic, terrified twitch in Vanessa's left eye. Marcus, however, did not miss a beat. He placed his hands flat on the mahogany table, leaning forward and looking David dead in the eyes with the practiced, chilling sincerity of a lifelong con artist. "Absolutely not," Marcus declared, his voice ringing with false conviction and righteous indignation. "I swear on my life, and on the pristine reputation of our family name, that every single document, every environmental survey, and every patent involved in Green Haven is 100% legitimate. There is zero risk. We are completely clean." "I am very glad to hear that," David replied softly, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. He slid a thick, legally binding federal compliance affidavit across the polished table, placing a heavy gold pen right beside it. "Then you will not mind signing this document, under penalty of federal perjury, certifying that all environmental and property claims in your pitch are entirely factual and thoroughly vetted." Without a single moment of hesitation, blinded by his own greed and arrogance, Marcus grabbed the pen. He signed his name with a massive flourish, and Vanessa eagerly leaned over to scribble her signature right beneath his. They smiled triumphantly at the banking representatives, fully convinced they had just outsmarted the system and successfully manipulated the most powerful energy conglomerate in the country. They had just sworn under federal oath that their entire web of lies was the absolute truth. The trap was set, the steel jaws had clamped shut, and they had just gleefully handed me the key to their destruction. David carefully slid the signed federal compliance affidavit into a sleek leather folder, securing it completely. He looked up, a perfectly polite, impenetrable smile returning to his face. "Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Vanessa. The board truly appreciates your thorough presentation," David said softly. Marcus puffed out his chest, a sickeningly smug grin spreading across his face. "So, when can we expect the preliminary funds to be wired into our holding account?" David folded his hands neatly on the table. "Unfortunately, a contract of this extraordinary magnitude, involving federal grants and our core corporate infrastructure, completely exceeds my direct authorization. The final decision rests entirely with the sole founder and chairman of the board." Marcus frowned, his arrogant facade slipping for a fraction of a second. "We were told we would be meeting with the top decision-maker today." "You are," David replied smoothly. He reached out and pressed a silver button on his control console. Instantly, the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows surrounding the boardroom tinted to a deep, opaque black, plunging the room into dramatic, cinematic shadows. The gigantic high-definition display dominating the front wall roared to life. The Aura Grid corporate logo spun gracefully, before dissolving into crisp, bold, blinding white text that illuminated the utterly confused faces of my family. Allison Washington, Chief Executive Officer and Founder. The silence that followed was not just quiet, it was a thick, suffocating, dead silence. It was the sound of a vacuum sucking all the oxygen out of the room. I stood up from the pathetic little wooden chair in the dark corner. I reached up and slowly unbuttoned the cheap, scratchy $18 polyester jacket. I let it slide off my shoulders, letting it fall into a crumpled heap on the pristine marble floor. I picked up the heavy leather briefcase Marcus had forced me to carry all morning, and I dropped it right into the nearest trash receptacle with a deafening thud. I walked deliberately toward the head of the polished mahogany table. Vanessa stumbled backward, her designer heels catching on the expensive carpet. The presentation remote slipped from her trembling fingers, shattering into pieces against the floor. Marcus looked as if all the blood had been violently siphoned from his body. His skin turned a sickly, translucent white, his eyes bulging as if he were staring at a ghost. At the back of the room, sitting in the plush guest chairs where they had been proudly observing their golden child, Eleanor and Richard were completely paralyzed. My mother's jaw had literally dropped open, her eyes wide with a mixture of catastrophic confusion and sheer, unadulterated terror. My father was gripping the leather armrest so hard his knuckles were bone white. They could not form a single, coherent syllable. I reached the head of the table and smoothly lowered myself into the massive, high-backed leather chair, the throne they thought would be occupied by a stranger they could easily manipulate. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished wood, staring directly into Marcus's panicking eyes. I was no longer the broken sister. I was the apex predator, and they had willingly walked into my cage. "You wanted the top decision-maker," I said, my voice echoing with absolute, uncompromising authority. "You are looking at her." Vanessa finally found her voice, a pathetic, high-pitched squeak that barely resembled human speech. "This is a joke. This has to be a prank. You are a hotline operator. You clean electronics." I ignored her completely. I did not give them a single second to breathe, to rationalize, or to invent another lie. I raised my hand and snapped my fingers. On the massive screen behind me, the title card vanished. It was instantly replaced by a split screen. On the left was the glowing, falsified environmental report Marcus had just presented. On the right was the true, highly classified geological survey my servers had pulled the night before. "Let us review your flawless environmental metrics, Marcus," I announced coldly, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. The document on the right is the actual toxic runoff analysis of the Green Havens site. The soil is catastrophically contaminated with heavy metals. It is utterly unstable. If you build a resort there, it will sink into a toxic mudslide within 3 years. Marcus opened his mouth like a gasping fish, but no sound came out. I pressed another button on my console. The screen shifted again, this time displaying a complex web of financial transactions, complete with offshore routing numbers and wire transfer receipts highlighted in bright red. "And here is the majestic flow of your supposedly clean capital," I continued, making sure the federal banking representatives had a perfect view. "These are direct routing numbers showing $350,000 systematically siphoned from the city planning budget into a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands under your maiden name, Vanessa." The two federal agents sitting next to David immediately pulled out their secure phones, their expressions turning to hardened stone. "But wait," I said, leaning back and giving them a chilling, merciless smile. "We cannot forget the foundation of unbreakable family ethics you just preached about to my board." I tapped my screen one more time. The room was suddenly filled with the crystal clear, high-definition audio recording I had captured outside Marcus's private study just hours ago. Vanessa's hysterical voice echoed through the boardroom. If they run their own independent audit and discover the groundwater toxicity levels, we are not just going to go bankrupt. Defrauding a public investment fund is a federal crime. We will both go to federal prison for 20 years. Then, Marcus's arrogant voice responded over the speakers. They will not look that closely. Oragrid is too massive to micromanage a suburban eco-resort. The recording stopped. The devastating reality of their situation crashed down on them like a concrete vault. They had just committed federal perjury, fraud, and admitted to a criminal conspiracy in front of the very people they were trying to rob. While handing the exact evidence over to federal banking regulators, Vanessa began to hyperventilate. Heavy, uncontrollable tears streamed down her meticulously contoured face, ruining her expensive makeup. She clawed at her own throat, completely unable to process the destruction of her perfect world. But I was not done. I saved the most painful personal execution for last. I stood up, picking up a thick red physical folder from my desk. I slammed it down onto the mahogany table. The sound cracked like a whip, making my parents flinch violently. "This," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal whisper, "is the original source code for the groundwater analysis algorithm you claimed Vanessa invented." I opened the folder, pulling out the digitally authenticated timestamp from 10 years ago, completely establishing my undeniable intellectual ownership. Then, I pulled out the notary documents they had submitted for the patent. I threw them across the table, letting them slide directly into my father's lap. "You thought I forgot about the hard drive I left in the attic," I said, staring directly at Richard and Eleanor, watching them shrink into nothingness under my absolute power. "You two actually sat in a notary office and forged legal documents. You helped Marcus steal my college thesis. You stripped my name from my own intellectual property, slapped Vanessa's name on it, and paraded her around as a genius. You actively robbed your own daughter to fund your vanity." Every single lie they had ever told was now stripped bare, exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights in front of the highest corporate authorities and federal law enforcement. They were entirely, utterly destroyed, and the best part was that they had engineered their own execution. One of the senior federal banking representatives slowly stood up from the mahogany table, pulling a secure communication device from his breast pocket. He did not even look at the trembling mess of a man standing before him. Effective immediately, all capital, assets, and holding accounts associated with the Greenhaven Initiative are officially frozen under suspicion of severe federal fraud, the agent declared, his voice devoid of any emotion. Before Marcus could even formulate a pathetic plea for mercy, the heavy oak doors of the executive boardroom were violently shoved open. 4 heavily armed officers from the Federal Financial Crimes Division stormed into the room. I had quietly forwarded the complete dossier of evidence to their cyber crimes unit at exactly 4 in the morning. The lead detective marched straight toward Marcus, grabbing him by the shoulder and forcefully spinning him around. The cold as sharp click of steel handcuffs echoing through the silent boardroom was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my entire life. Marcus was formally placed under arrest for systemic corruption, bribery, and defrauding a public investment fund. The sight of the steel cuffs completely shattered whatever fragile sanity Vanessa had left. She let out a piercing, hysterical shriek, but she did not run to comfort her husband. Instead, she spun around and viciously lunged at our parents. Her manicured nails dug wildly into Eleanor's expensive silk blouse as she screamed, her face contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. "This is your fault," Vanessa shrieked, violently shaking our mother. "You told me to steal the patent. You said she was just a stupid hotline operator who would never figure it out. You ruined my life." The perfectly curated facade of their loving, morally superior family completely imploded right there on the corporate carpet, deteriorating into a vicious, feral brawl as they desperately tried to tear each other down to save themselves. Richard and Eleanor collapsed onto their knees. The arrogance that had defined their entire existence was entirely gone, replaced by raw, humiliating desperation. Tears streamed down my father's deeply lined face. "Allison, please," Richard begged, his voice cracking pitifully as he reached his trembling hands out toward me. "We are your parents. You are our own flesh and blood. Please, you have to show us some mercy." I looked down at the pathetic creatures groveling at my feet. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the crumpled, deeply insulting basement assistant contract they had tried to force upon me just 2 nights ago, and dropped it onto the floor right in front of their knees. "People with empty hands do not have the right to negotiate," I said coldly. I turned my back on them and looked at my chief operating officer. "David, the Greenhaven contract is permanently terminated. However, I want you to immediately establish a special corporate trust fund, track down every single innocent construction worker, contractor, and laborer who was hired for that site. I want all of their pending wages paid in full directly from my personal accounts. They will not go hungry because of these criminals." David nodded respectfully. The police officers aggressively dragged Marcus, Vanessa, and my sobbing parents out of the boardroom, their frantic screaming fading down the long hallway until the heavy doors clicked shut, leaving behind absolute peace. An hour later, I stood alone by the panoramic glass window on the 50th floor, gently swirling a glass of vintage red wine. Far below, the microscopic flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers slowly pulled away from the plaza, carrying the toxic weight of my past away forever. I took a slow, deep sip of the wine. It tasted like absolute freedom, smiling. I turned away from the glass and walked confidently back to my desk, ready to continue steering my $2.7 billion empire into a brilliant, limitless future. Thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart for listening to my story today. I would love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from right now? Please let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's journey and want to support our channel, please consider joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon community. There, you can listen to the absolute best, highly detailed, exclusive true stories that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the Patreon QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the direct link provided in the video description and pinned comment. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.